Welcome back, friends. We're now in the Onslow County Museum. We started our tour today out at the New River, at New River Inlet, where the river meets the ocean. That is that site where people would first want to call this place home. Now let's back up just a little bit because we want to think about what you've learned about the people who lived in this area and who lived in North Carolina. Certainly our story begins with the first peoples, the Native Americans. You know, we talk all the time about who was here first. Well, these are those first people. And then we want to talk about settlement. So let's think about this. And let's think about this sort of in steps. Why would people come here? Think about that. Why would you move to a new place? 2, who would those people be? Where would they come from? And then finally, when they got here, how would they make their life? And what would be their lasting legacy? Think about that word there, legacy. What are the memories, the traditions, the life ways, how they changed the land? How did they leave this place? And how can we still see that when we go around Onslow County today? How can we see the reminders of those settlers? Well, first question, where did those people come from? Why did they come here? Who are they? Legacies. So, where did they come from? Well, it can be said that North Carolina is a settlement or a colony of colonists. A lot of settlers who came into North Carolina came from other colonies that had already been established. They came from Massachusetts. We know when we think about settlement in Massachusetts, our mind always goes to those Puritans, to those Pilgrims. So a lot of settlers actually came many years later from Massachusetts. They also came from Virginia. Think about Tidewater, Virginia, and what we know about the early settlement of Virginia. 1607, right? Then people came from Maryland and also from South Carolina. So into North Carolina came settlers or colonists from other colonies. Now, they would come into North Carolina pretty early on. We know that our very first town is a place called Bath. Now, Bath, people settled there in the early 18th century. So around 1703, 04, 05 are these first settlers. In 1713, the first settlers would come here to what would become known as Onslow County. So, colony of colonists, 1713, first come here into Onslow County. But why? Why do you want to come to this place? Well, let's think about it. These settlers who came from other colonies, a lot of them came from Massachusetts, Virginia. It's the opportunity to have land. And those places were being settled, and so maybe you didn't have access to land there. So first things first, you're coming here because of the availability of land. Secondly, it's the availability and the abundance of natural resources. We started our tour up at the New River, where the New River meets the ocean. Waterways are key. Waterways are key, and the availability of water. You want to come here, you want to settle this place. So first there's land, and then there's water, and then there's an abundance of forest, so trees. Now, you don't just come here because it's pretty scenery. You don't just come here because there's beautiful landscape, there's beautiful water, there's beautiful trees. You need to use those resources. So let's dig a little deeper. If you're going to use those resources, how will you use them? And why? What's the motivation for using those resources? Well, we've already said that we're a colony of colonists, But let's get our timeline right. We're colonists, and we're colonists of what country? That's right, we are colonists of the United Kingdom of England. And we are ruled by England. And England in the 17th century and the 18th century is one of the most powerful nations in the world. And it is really, really powerful because one of the reasons is it has a huge, powerful navy. They travel the world, these huge vessels, and you have to build those vessels, right? So, let's think about it. We're in England. We're an English colony. We're coming from Virginia, Massachusetts, Maryland, South Carolina. We're coming here to this place that would become Onslow County. We're coming here because of these natural resources, water and land and wood. And so how are we going to use them? Well, England, as I said, is a big, powerful navy. They need to build ships. Here's the thing. England is a little tiny, tiny island. They've cut down so many of their trees. And so, what's here? Trees. I want you to imagine you're on one of those tall sailing ships. Imagine you've just come here to settle. And what do you see? You see trees. And not only do you see them, you can literally smell them. You know what a pine tree smells like? What pine cones or pine needles smell like that? It's resinous, that smell. Think about what a pine tree smells like. And imagine being able to smell that even out at sea. You know, more than 100 years before this place was even settled, there were explorers who were sailing along our coastline. And they saw those trees. They smelled that resinous smell wafting out over the ocean. Long before they even settled here, there were explorers who knew this place was here. They just had not made it home yet. They just had not made it home yet. Then in 1713, when they do get here to settle, these trees, these waterways, are two of the most important things that they're looking at and looking for. So here you are, imagining all these trees as you're out at sea. When you get on land, there are so many trees. I want you to imagine that even in the daytime, there are places that the trees rise up into the sky and it's like they're touching. They create what's called that canopy. And with that, even in the daytime, it can seem places where it's quite dark. As a matter of fact, we have a place in our forest that's called Dark Entry. And it's because there's so many trees. Now, these trees and the waterways and the land are what bring you here. You're going to use these trees for the wood material. But you know what? In these pine trees, there's something else that we want. We want the real sap. Now think about it. These are pine trees. Not going to use this sap to make syrup for your pancakes. The sap that's in these pine trees is used to create what we call naval stores. Tar, pitch, turpentine. They're used to build ships. They're used to caulk the ships. When you build a ship out of wood, it seems like a great idea, except sometimes that wood kind of expands and contracts, sort of like the gaps in your fingers. So you're going to want to make sure that it's caulked really tightly, that it's sealed up. Think about it. Have you ever seen Pirates of the Caribbean? Think about those tall ships, and it always looks like they're kind of washing the ship, or what you hear pirates say, swab the deck. Well, in lots of places, what they're doing is actually painting the ship with the sap that's been processed for those ships. That's what makes them so shiny, but it's also what keeps them from leaking and keeps them from rotting and falling apart. So the sap from these trees, not just the wood, but the sap from these trees. Then the waterways. Well, certainly we know that we're going to use the rivers for transportation. But can we drink the river water? No, we can't drink the river water. Can we drink the ocean water? No, we can't drink that water. But there are also other sources of water that are here. What I like to think of as these underground rivers called aquifers. And that water is where we get our fresh water to drink. So we have the water for transportation, we have the water to drink that comes from the aquifers, and certainly living in this water are all kinds of abundant sea life. So we have fishes and shellfish that we can gather. So we have food source that comes from this waterway as well. Then let's get to the land. You know, this is pretty flat. Onslow County is what we call, it's part of the coastal plain of North Carolina. So we don't have big rolling hills, but we have really super soil. And this super soil is great for agriculture. So we can grow things. What are we going to grow? Well, those earliest crops were food crops that we could feed our families. So things like potatoes and peas, things that can be preserved. So we're growing beans and peas and squashes, things that will last a long time that we can feed our family. It's not going to be for some time before we grow things that are considered what we call money crops. So things like tobacco and cotton. That's not going to be grown right away. Our first thought is to grow things that we can have for food. So let's revisit, let's kind of review what we've talked about. First thing first, we're a colony of colonists. People are coming here from other places, but we are still a colony of England. And if we're a colony of England, we need to produce things for England. And what do they need? They need trees to build big ships and to get the sap from those trees. When we get here, we also find waterways, and we use the water for transportation. We use the aquifers for drinking water, and we use the waterways for fishing and for shellfish. And finally, land. So we're going to dig into this soil, and we're going to farm, and we're going to grow things that we can feed our family. This story of trees, of wood, of waterways, water, river, ocean, streams, aquifers, of land, soil that we can grow things. That is the story of Onslow County. That's the story of the very earliest settlement, those first people who come here. Now, there are other people, as we open up this place for settlement, who come here for other reasons. We have people who come here from France, the French Huguenots. Now, the French Huguenots, or Huguenots, are people who come here because they're seeking out religious freedom, and they come here for that purpose. Then there are people who come from other parts of the British Isles. Maybe they come here, one, because they are English settlers, but also this is an opportunity to own land, something that would never happen for their families in England or Ireland or Scotland or Wales. All those British Isles, people come here for the availability of land and the chance to maybe own something. Now, maybe they don't come here immediately and able to own something. Maybe they come here as someone called an indentured servant, who actually doesn't pay themselves, but who someone pays their passage to get here. They work for that person for 7 years, and then they will have the opportunity to seek their own fortune. Maybe we have people who come here from Germany, and those people came here first with the Swiss, through Newburgh, and they come here. And then we have people who come here from the west coast of Africa. And those earliest settlers did not come here of their own choice. Those earliest peoples who came from the west coast of Africa came here as enslaved peoples. They were kidnapped, captured, put into the bottom of ships, sailed across the ocean, and then were sold into slavery. Those people, unlike the indentured servants, could not really work just 7 years and earn their freedom. Perhaps they never had the opportunity to earn their freedom. And so all of those peoples came here together and would build what we would call Onslow County, using the natural resources the water, the wood, the soil, utilizing what can be taken from those natural places. Fishes and shellfish from the oceans and the rivers, the sap from the trees, growing crops in the soil, building a place, building a community, and then contributing all of the traditions that come from their cultures. So here we get finally to that last piece of the puzzle, that piece of the puzzle of legacy, bringing together cultural traditions. Those cultural traditions that we have here in Onslow County can be found in a number of ways. They can be found in the ways that we build our houses. Houses that are a combination of English-style construction that you might have seen in Massachusetts, and construction that you might have seen in the Caribbean, where these traders who are on these big ships might have gone back and forth. It might also be seen in language. We certainly speak English here in Onslow County. The settlers would have spoken English, but they would have borrowed words from all of those other people who come here. So in our very language, in the way we build our houses, in the types of clothes that we wore, in the way that we worshiped, the type of churches that were here, in our food, the food that we grew and the way that we process that food. Not everywhere in the world do they eat the same foods that we eat, but what was produced here locally and those traditions that brought them together are still very much a part of our story. Things like eating hams and the way we process those hams. Things like eating oysters and the way that oysters are gathered and when they can be gathered and the way that we cook them. The way that we cook our vegetables. Things like greens and peas that would have been taken from African traditions. All of these things become the legacy of this place that will be Onslow County. Well, let's go back to our timeline just a second. We're settled in 1713. We are an English colony. People come here from other places. They come from other colonies and they come across the ocean, all building this place. And from 1713 until 1776, we will be a colony. This is the story of our settlement, the story of our colonization. And in 1776, all of that will change when we will become part of the newly independent America. But that, my friends, is a story for another day. Thank you for visiting us here at the museum and helping us set the foundations for our story of settlement.